So to start our flight we need to get ourselves to Kenley Aerodrome, and we can see the south of the UK here, and as we zoom in towards Gatwick and Heathrow we can see just between the two and adjacent to Biggin Hill we come across Kenley Aerodrome. The runway orientation means that runway 20 would be the ideal runway for departure, as that will put us on pretty much a direct heading to where we want to go. So our departure out of Kenley Aerodrome today is a little bit unorthodox for a couple of reasons, and as we get rolling here I'll explain what those are. Essentially, Kenley is an active airfield, however it is owned by the Ministry of Defence, and the only aircraft that are permitted to operate are gliders. If you go there on the weekend you might be lucky enough to see a very, very short field landing like this one. There was some air cadets up there that day that were doing some very quick circuits, so it was literally take off, circuit, land, and the next one was getting in, so very quick turnaround. So as we get airborne here out of Kenley, we're just going to take a look over to the right and we'll see, not particularly well modelled, but it's the war memorial for the personnel that served at Kenley during the Second World War. And we'll just continue climbing out straight ahead on the runway heading up to around about 2,000 feet, maybe a little bit more. A few things to be aware of when flying this flight, particularly if you're going to fly it online. The terrain in this area rises up to around 600 feet above sea level, and the Class A airspace of the London TMA starts at about, well, it starts at 2,500 feet. So it's quite a narrow little bit of airspace to operate in this region. Behind us to the north it very rapidly becomes Heathrow and London City airspace, and ahead of us to the south, you can just about see it on the horizon there, is the Gatwick zone. So we're really operating in a very condensed piece of airspace here. And as I say, particularly of concern if you're going to be flying this flight whilst online, which we aren't today, just to keep things simple. So if we look left, we'll see a motorway down underneath us, which continues off to the right hand side. Now this is going to be a key landmark for us, and as we turn to the right here, I'm just going to mark there with an X. That's pretty much where we're heading to, just the north side of the motorway. And this sort of snaking turn there is Rygate Hill, and that's our target for today. It's probably worth mentioning as we just trek on over towards our turn point there that the airspace that we're flying in now, with Biggin Hill and Kenley and Croydon and just to our south what would have been RAF Red Hill, these were fighter stations that played an absolute key role during the Battle of Britain. The aircraft that took off from these airfields were the first defence against anything that was coming up from the south towards London. So the skies that we're in now would absolutely have been a hive of activity during the Battle of Britain. There would have been dogfights going on right in the region that we're in now. In fact, if you walk in any of the fields around this area, you can see bomb craters where the bombers either missed or had to dump their cargo before making an exit. So you'll see as we approach here on our left hand side, we've got quite a distinctive dark coloured field with some tractor lines in it. That's probably the most easy thing to see. Adjacent to the motorway junction here, we've got this sort of triangular shaped field with some barren patches up at the far end, sort of sandy coloured patches there. The field that we're going to land in is this next field, which has this sort of L shape to it, and we're going to land in the direction of the arrow, so we're essentially on an upwind leg at the moment, and that X marks our ideal touchdown point. Now you'll see there's a line of trees about halfway through this field. You can just about get stopped before those trees, but you can see as we come round here into the crosswind that there is actually a little gap in the trees there. So as long as we're very accurate with our flying, it is possible to have some overrun. There is also a gap in the trees at the touchdown end, which again quite important if we can manage to get through that gap. We can see there a nice straight line, and we'll get ourselves down nicely. So we'll turn left now onto our downwind leg. Again, as a reminder, if you're flying online, anything south of this town, starting at 1,500 feet, will be putting you into the Gatwick zone, so caution there. And we'll keep the turn coming on to roughly an easterly heading, which will put us on a downwind leg for the field. You see we've started descending now, we're down to 1,300 feet, that's pretty good for the downwind. And we're getting ourselves slowed down now as well. Things do happen fairly quickly from this point on. So flying over the town of Rygate here, and we've got a lake, sort of a triangular shaped lake just ahead of the left wing leading edge. This is going to be a good reference point for our base turn, and the earlier that you can get yourself configured here, gear down, flaps down, etc., particularly getting the aircraft in trim as well. If you're flying a Comanche, it's quite important to get this aircraft nicely in trim. The earlier you can get all that done, the better. It will make your life a little bit easier. This field, if you're approaching low enough to make a decent short field landing, it doesn't present itself to you until quite late in the approach, which makes things a little bit tricky. So into our base leg here, and the motorway is obviously further north of where our field is, so we can use that to guide our final turn. And as we come into the final turn, we're going to line up on those tractor lines in that dark coloured field that we saw first of all. Again, getting that speed back, we need to be really, really slow, right above the stall speed in order to get ourselves stopped. You'll see when we get into this field as well that if you happen to bounce on the first touchdown, you will bounce into another little hillock, which essentially is going to make you bounce again, and you will quite merrily bounce your way into the trees at the far end. So here we go, we've got this sandy coloured field here, which is, that's not our field, it's the one next to it, the one further on, and here we can just about see our gap in the trees, just on the nose there, and that's our line. That's our line that we want to take for our final approach. Getting nice and low, nice and slow, aiming for this gap in the trees. It looks really narrow, it really does. It is narrow, but I can show you there, it does fit just about in the Comanche. So here we go, we're dragging it in now, dragging it in, dip it down but don't let the speed build, and then positive touchdown, and once it's down, keep it down, because if you bounce back there, you're going to bounce here, and it's going to throw you off over the edge, and you'll just find yourself in the end of the trees there. It is slightly downhill as well from that gap in the trees, so again, that's all going to work against you. Once you've got yourself stopped, make a 180 degree turn, head back towards the east, and you want to park up the aircraft in line with the trees pretty much, that gap in the trees. If you can align yourself perpendicular so each wing is pointing to the trees on either side, that'll set you up well for our next step. We'll shut down the aircraft, secure the aircraft, and we'll jump out. Okay, follow me. So once we're out of the aircraft, we're going to look to our south, looking over the wings there, and using the drone camera, we're just going to come up and over the trees, a little bit easier than walking in the trees, and looking south there over the town of Rygate. And if we bring ourselves down and to the left, you'll see this very, very clear gap in the trees here. Big open space in the trees. And we get our first glimpse of the wreckage itself.
On the 19th of March 1945, a B-17, known as the Flying Fortress, from the 547th Bomber Squadron, departed from the US airbase at Grafton Underwood in Northamptonshire and headed for their target close to the German-Czech border some 500 miles away. At the controls was Second Lieutenant Robert Griffin, a veteran of 14 bombing raids over Germany. Griffin's normal aircraft, Peasley's Payoff, was down for repairs, so the crew were using a different aircraft, tail number 35. This was 35's 13th mission into enemy territory. Widespread low cloud had been a problem since they departed, and it meant the crew had to switch to their secondary target, an oil refinery at Plauen. They successfully hit the target, but received damage as they turned back northwest. Some 9 hours after departing their base, the aircraft was limping home. It's thought the bad weather and the damage meant the crew elected to stay underneath the overcast. Witnesses on the ground reported the engine was trailing thick black smoke as it flew low overhead. As the aircraft continued north, it entered the low cloud and collided with trees shortly after. The impact was catastrophic and there were no survivors. The pilot, Second Lieutenant Robert Griffin, was the oldest of the 9 crew on board. He was 3 months shy of his 26th birthday. At the site today stand 2 replica wingtips made from oak. They're spaced apart the same wingspan as that of a B-17, and each contains some of the molten aluminium from the original wreckage. The site itself is accessible by foot and is well worth a visit, as is Kenley, from which we departed, which has been claimed to be one of the best maintained World War II airfields in recent times.
Are turning the tide of the World War by their prowess and by their devotion. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few.